The telegram crumpled in Eleanor Hartwell's gloved hand as the last train disappeared into the blizzard, its whistle mocking her like a funeral dirge. 28 years old, $3.17 to her name. Nowhere to go. The depot lamp flickered once, twice, then died, plunging her into darkness so complete she couldn't see her own breath freezing in the December air. She had survived scandal, betrayal, and 1,000 miles of desperate hope. But this might finally break her. Before we continue, please subscribe and follow this story to the end. Comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey has traveled. The wind cut through Eleanor's wool coat like a surgeon's scalpel, precise, cruel, indifferent to the damage it caused. She pressed herself against the depot wall, trying to steal what little warmth the wood planks might offer. But the building had gone cold hours ago when the station master locked up and went home to his Christmas supper. Her fingers were past numbness, now entering that dangerous stage where you stopped feeling the cold because your body was giving up the fight. She knew the signs. She'd seen frostbite victims at Boston General back when she still had a profession, back when people called her Nurse Hartwell, instead of whispering "that woman" behind raised hands. The telegram was still clutched in her hand, though she couldn't read it anymore in the darkness. She didn't need to. The words had burned themselves into her memory, like a brand engagement terminated. Stop. Family cannot associate with woman of questionable character. Stop. Do not come stop. Robert Harrison. The man who'd promised her a fresh start, who'd written her passionate letters about building a life together in Wyoming territory, who'd sent her a train ticket and told her to come before Christmas so they could start the new year as husband and wife. Robert Harrison, who'd apparently heard about Boston. Eleanor laughed, a sound that came out more like a sob. The irony was almost beautiful in its cruelty. She'd lost everything: her position at the hospital, her reputation, her future, because she'd refused to stay silent when Dr. Morrison put his hands where they didn't belong. She'd reported him, filed official complaints, stood before the hospital board and detailed every inappropriate touch, every whispered threat, every time he'd used his authority to corner young nurses in storage rooms. And for her trouble, she'd been branded hysterical, attention-seeking, a woman of loose morals trying to ruin a respected physician's career. Dr. Morrison still worked at Boston General. Eleanor Hartwell had been escorted from the building by security and told never to return. She should have seen it coming with Robert, too. Men like him didn't marry women with reputations, no matter how false those reputations might be. They married proper ladies who knew how to smile and nod and never make waves that might disturb their careful social standing. A sound cut through the wind, hoofbeats growing closer. Eleanor's heart jumped with hope before common sense kicked in. Midnight on Christmas Eve in the middle of a blizzard. No one decent would be out in this weather, which meant whoever was coming probably wasn't someone a woman alone should be glad to see. She pressed tighter against the wall, trying to make herself invisible in the shadows. The hoofbeats slowed, stopped. A man's voice called out, deep and rough with cold. "Anyone there?" Eleanor held her breath. Maybe he'd think the depot was empty. Maybe he'd move on. Maybe, "I can see your footprints in the snow, ma'am. Fresh ones leading right to that wall you're hiding against." Damn! Eleanor straightened, pulling what remained of her dignity around her like armor. If she was going to die tonight, frozen or murdered, take your pick, she'd do it standing up. She stepped into the thin moonlight filtering through the storm clouds. The man sat astride a massive horse, both of them coated in snow. He was broad-shouldered beneath a heavy coat, his face hidden by the shadow of his hat brim. "Depot's closed," she said, proud that her voice came out steady, despite the chattering of her teeth. "Station master went home hours ago." "I can see that." He swung down from the saddle with an ease that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. "Question is, why are you still here?" "I missed my connection. In this storm, trains stopped running at sunset." He took a step closer, and Eleanor instinctively moved back. He froze. "I'm not going to hurt you, ma'am. Forgive me if I don't take a stranger's word for it." Her hand found the small knife in her coat pocket, the one she'd carried since leaving Boston. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The man raised his hands, slowly, palms out. "Fair enough. Name's Nathan Bridger. I run a horse ranch about 5 miles west of here. Was checking the line shack before the storm got worse when I saw the depot lamp was out. Thought maybe old Henderson forgot to fill it before he left. Well, as you can see, Mr. Henderson remembered just fine. The lamp ran out on its own. How long have you been out here? That's none of your concern. Ma'am, it's 15 below and dropping. You've been out here long enough that you're not shivering anymore, which means your body's shutting down. That is my concern. Eleanor blinked. He was right, she'd stopped shivering about 20 minutes ago. She'd actually felt warmer, which some distant part of her medical training recognized as a very bad sign. I have nowhere else to go, she heard herself say. The hotel's full, the boarding house won't take single women without references, and I don't have money for either anyway. Nathan Bridger was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved toward his horse, and Eleanor's hand tightened on her knife. I've got a spare room, he said, pulling a heavy blanket from his saddlebag. Housekeeper's there, proper and respectable. You'd be warm and safe. Why would you do that? You don't know me. He turned back to her, and for the first time she could see his face clearly weathered, maybe late 30s, with eyes that held the kind of sadness that came from loss rather than malice. Because it's Christmas Eve, he said simply, and because I know what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn. Eleanor wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell him she didn't need charity, didn't need rescuing, could take care of herself the way she always had. But her lips were too numb to form the words, and her legs were starting to buckle beneath her. The room has a lock, Nathan added. On the inside, and my word as a gentleman that you'll be treated with respect under my roof. A gentleman. Eleanor almost laughed. She'd known plenty of men who called themselves gentlemen while they did ungentlemanly things in dark corners. But the alternative was freezing to death against a depot wall, and spite alone wasn't enough to keep her warm. One night, she said, just until the storm passes. One night, he agreed. He held out the blanket. May I? She nodded, and he draped it around her shoulders, with movements careful enough that he never actually touched her. Then he turned to his horse, checking the saddle with the kind of attention to detail that suggested this wasn't a man who did anything carelessly. Can you ride, or should I walk beside you? I can ride. Probably. Maybe. She hadn't been on a horse since she was 12, but damned if she'd admit weakness now. Nathan led the horse to the depot platform, using the height to help Eleanor mount without requiring him to lift her. Another careful gesture. Another sign that maybe possibly he actually meant what he said about respect. He swung up behind her, keeping a proper distance, his arms reaching around her, only enough to grasp the reins. Hold on to the saddle horn. I'll keep you steady. The ride through the blizzard should have been terrifying. The snow was so thick, Eleanor couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The wind howled like something alive and angry, and the cold bit through even Nathan's heavy blanket. But his body blocked the worst of the wind, and his voice stayed calm as he murmured directions to the horse. Easy now, Goliath. That's it. Just like we've done 100 times. Goliath, Eleanor found herself asking. Seemed fitting for a horse that size. She could hear the smile in his voice. Though he's gentle as a kitten once you earn his trust. How does one earn a horse's trust? Same way you earn anyone's trust. Consistency, kindness, never asking for more than they can give. He paused. And carrots help. Despite everything, the cold, the fear, the complete upending of her life, Eleanor felt her lips twitch into something almost like a smile. They rode in silence after that, and Eleanor felt herself starting to drift. The exhaustion of the past 3 days was catching up with her, 3 days on trains eating nothing but stale bread, sleeping in snatches between stations. 3 days running from Boston toward a future that turned out to be as fictional as the promises that created it. Stay awake. Nathan's voice cut through the fog. We're almost there. You can sleep when you're warm. I'm so tired. I know, but sleeping in this cold means not waking up. Tell me something, anything. Keep your mind working. Like what? Where are you from? What brought you to Wyoming? The truth tried to claw its way out of her throat. Scandal, betrayal, desperation. But Eleanor had learned the hard way that the truth rarely set you free. It just gave people ammunition. "Boston," she said instead. "I was supposed to marry a man in Silver Ridge." Was supposed to. He changed his mind. Nathan was quiet for a moment. His loss. The words were simple matter of fact, as if he was commenting on the weather rather than passing judgment on a man he'd never met. But something in Eleanor's chest cracked a little at the casual kindness. Lights appeared through the swirling snow, golden and warm, spilling from windows like promises of safety. A house materialized out of the darkness, 2 stories solid and well-built. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Eleanor could smell wood burning, could imagine the heat waiting inside. "We're here," Nathan said. "Hold on, I'm going to dismount first." He slid from the saddle landing in knee-deep snow with barely a sound. Then he reached up to help Eleanor down, his hands careful on her waist, releasing her the moment her feet touched the ground. The front door burst open before they reached the porch. "Nathan Bridger, what in God's name are you doing out in—" The woman stopped mid-sentence, her eyes landing on Eleanor. She was perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she'd seen enough of life to be surprised by very little. "Who's this?" "Found her at the depot. Mrs. Carson, this is—" Nathan paused. "I apologize, ma'am, I never got your name, or—" "Eleanor Hartwell." Mrs. Carson's eyes sharpened. "Hartwell, the nurse from Boston." Eleanor's blood went cold. "How do you— Your fiancé's been telling anyone who'll listen that you're a woman of questionable character, said you'd be coming through on the evening train, and that folks should know to avoid you." The older woman's expression was unreadable. "Come inside before you freeze to death. We'll sort out the character questions after you thaw out." Eleanor wanted to run. Wanted to disappear back into the blizzard rather than face another town's judgment, another round of whispers and sideways glances. But Nathan's hand was gentle on her elbow, guiding her toward the warmth, and she was too damn tired to fight anymore. The house wrapped around her like an embrace. Heat from a massive fireplace, the smell of pine and bread, and something cooking that made her stomach clench with hunger. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with strings of cranberries and paper ornaments that looked handmade. "Sit." Mrs. Carson pointed to a chair near the fire. "Nathan, get that wet coat off her before she catches pneumonia. I'll make tea." Nathan helped Eleanor out of her coat with the same careful respect he'd shown all night. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't work the buttons, and he took over without comment, his own hands steady and warm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Carson's got questions, and she won't be shy about asking them." "I heard that," the older woman called from the kitchen. Eleanor managed a weak laugh. "Is she always like this?" "Worse when she's being protective." Nathan hung her coat on a hook near the fire. "Fair warning, she was my wife's mother. Lost her daughter 5 years back. Been keeping house for me ever since, and she's got opinions about pretty much everything." "Your wife." Eleanor processed that information. "I'm sorry for your loss." Something flickered across Nathan's face, grief old and worn smooth by time. "Thank you. Lily was. She was everything good." Before Eleanor could respond, a sound from upstairs made them both turn. Footsteps quick and light, followed by a boy appearing on the landing. He couldn't have been more than 10, with dark hair that stuck up in every direction and eyes that went wide when he saw Eleanor. "Uncle Nate." "Who's that?" "This is Miss Hartwell, Tommy. She needed shelter from the storm." Nathan's voice gentled in a way that spoke of deep affection. "Come say hello properly." The boy Tommy descended the stairs with exaggerated caution, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. When he reached the bottom, he executed a surprisingly formal bow. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Hartwell." "The pleasure is mine, Tommy." Eleanor found herself charmed despite her exhaustion. "Though I apologize for arriving so late. It's Christmas Eve. We're supposed to help people on Christmas Eve." He looked at Nathan for confirmation. "Right, Uncle Nate?" "That's what Pa always said." "That's right." Nathan's hand found the boy's shoulder steady and protective. "Your father was wise about a lot of things." Mrs. Carson returned with a steaming mug. "Drink this. It's got honey and whiskey. Medical purposes only." Eleanor accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The tea was strong and sweet, the whiskey burning pleasantly as it went down. She could feel it spreading through her system, fighting back the cold that had settled into her bones. Now then. Mrs. Carson settled into a chair across from her, hands folded in her lap like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. Nathan says you were supposed to marry Robert Harrison. That was the plan. And he called off the engagement. He did. Because of what happened in Boston. Eleanor met the older woman's eyes steadily. Yes. Tell me what happened. The truth, not whatever nonsense Robert's been spreading. This was it. The moment where Eleanor could defend herself, could explain that she'd only done what was right, what was necessary. Or she could stay silent, could protect herself from further judgment by refusing to give people ammunition to use against her. But something in Mrs. Carson's face, a hardness around the eyes, a tightness in the jaw, made Eleanor think that maybe this was a woman who understood what it meant to stand up when staying quiet would have been easier. I was a nurse at Boston General Hospital, Eleanor began. One of the senior physicians, Dr. William Morrison, had a reputation for being inappropriate with the younger nurses, touching them when he shouldn't, cornering them in supply rooms, using his authority to make them uncomfortable. And you reported him, Mrs. Carson said. Not a question. I did. Multiple times. Filed formal complaints with the hospital board, gave them detailed accounts from nurses who were too frightened to come forward themselves. Eleanor's hands tightened on the mug. The board decided I was hysterical, that I was making up stories to get attention. They dismissed me for creating discord and damaging a respected physician's reputation. Bastards, Mrs. Carson said flatly. Tommy's eyes went wide. Grandma. Don't you grandma me. Sometimes the only word that fits is a harsh one. She turned back to Eleanor. And Robert Harrison heard about this and decided you weren't suitable wife material. His exact words were woman of questionable character. Said his family couldn't associate with someone who'd caused such scandal. Nathan, who'd been standing silent by the fireplace, made a sound low in his throat. Robert Harrison's family made their money running opium to Chinese railroad workers and calling it medicine. They've got no room to judge anyone's character. Nathan, Mrs. Carson said warningly, it's true and you know it. The Harrisons are respected because they're rich, not because they're decent. He looked at Eleanor. You're better off without him. That's easy to say when you're not stranded in a strange town with $3 and nowhere to go. Eleanor said more sharply than she intended. You're right. I apologize. Nathan's voice was quiet. But the offer stands. You've got a room here as long as you need it. No strings, no expectations. Why? The question burst out before Eleanor could stop it. Why would you help someone you don't know, someone whose own fiancé thought wasn't worth standing by? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were measured, careful. 5 years ago, my wife went into labor 2 months early. I was out checking the north pasture, thought I had time to finish the job before riding back. By the time I got home, he stopped, swallowed hard. She died calling for me, and I wasn't there. The room had gone silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Mrs. Carson found me 3 days later, sitting in the bedroom where Lily had died, holding our stillborn son. I hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, hadn't done anything but sit there, wishing I could go back and make different choices. Nathan's gray eyes met Eleanor's. She dragged me out of that room, force-fed me soup, reminded me every day for 6 months that I was still alive, and that meant I still had responsibilities. Mrs. Carson's face had softened, her earlier severity replaced by something that looked like old grief. Point is, Nathan continued, everyone needs help sometimes. Everyone deserves a second chance. You stood up for women who couldn't stand up for themselves. That takes courage. The kind of courage that should be rewarded, not punished. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyelids and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not in front of strangers. Not after everything she'd survived. The spare room's upstairs, second door on the left. Mrs. Carson said, her voice gruff. There's a lock on the inside like Nathan said. Clean sheets, extra quilts, wash basin and fresh water. You'll stay until the storm passes, and then we'll figure out what comes next. I can't pay you. Did anyone ask you to? Mrs. Carson stood brushing off her skirt. Now drink your tea and get some food in you. You look like a strong wind would blow you over. Tommy had been watching the whole exchange with wide eyes. Now he piped up. Miss Hartwell, do you like Christmas pudding? Grandma makes the best in the whole territory. I'm sure I would, Tommy. Thank you. The boy beamed, then raced toward the kitchen. I'll get you some. After he disappeared, Eleanor looked between Nathan and Mrs. Carson. You're being very kind to someone who might bring trouble to your door. Robert Harrison isn't just going to forget I'm here. Let him come. Mrs. Carson's voice had gone hard again. I've been wanting a word with that boy about his lack of backbone. Nathan smiled just a little. Mrs. Carson doesn't suffer fools gladly. I don't suffer them at all. The older woman fixed Eleanor with a sharp look. But I do respect women who stand up for what's right, even when it costs them. You'll have shelter here, Miss Hartwell, for as long as you need it. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, that she didn't need charity from strangers. But the truth was, she did need it, desperately. And these people were offering it without asking for anything in return. Thank you, she said quietly. I won't forget this kindness. See that you don't, Mrs. Carson said. Then unexpectedly, her face softened. My daughter Lily used to say that the measure of a person wasn't in how they acted when things were easy, but in what they did when the cost was high. You paid a high cost for doing right. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Tommy returned with a bowl of pudding practically bouncing with excitement. Here, it's still warm. Eleanor accepted it with gratitude that went beyond words. The pudding was sweet and rich, full of dried fruit and spices that spoke of careful preparation. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Tommy chattered about Christmas traditions, and Nathan added wood to the fire, and Mrs. Carson moved around the kitchen with efficient purpose. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt something that might have been hope. She finished the pudding, accepted a second cup of tea, and let the warmth of the house seep into her frozen bones. Eventually, Mrs. Carson declared it was time for bed and led her upstairs to a room that was simple but comfortable. A narrow bed with a thick quilt, a washstand with a flowered basin, and a window that looked out over what would probably be beautiful country once the sun rose. There's a nightgown in the dresser, Mrs. Carson said. Used to be Lily's. She'd want you to have it. Mrs. Carson, Ruth. My name's Ruth. The older woman's hand found Eleanor's shoulder brief but warm. Get some sleep, child. Things always look different in the morning light. After Ruth left, Eleanor locked the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to acknowledge how close she'd come to disaster tonight. A few more hours in that cold, and they'd have found her frozen come morning. Instead, she was in a warm room with food in her stomach, and people downstairs who'd offered help, without asking questions about what she could give in return. She changed into Lily's nightgown soft cotton that smelled faintly of lavender and climbed into bed. The quilt was heavy and warm, the mattress surprisingly comfortable. Through the floor she could hear the murmur of voices, Nathan and Ruth talking quietly. Tommy's higher voice asking questions. The sound was oddly comforting, like being part of something, even if she was just a temporary guest. Eleanor closed her eyes and let herself drift too exhausted to fight sleep any longer. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what came next. Tomorrow, she'd face whatever consequences Robert Harrison's gossip had created. Tomorrow, she'd start putting together the pieces of her shattered life. But tonight, she was warm and safe. And for now, that was enough. Eleanor woke to voices arguing downstairs. She lay still for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar room and the pale winter light filtering through frost-covered windows. Then memory crashed back the depot, the blizzard Nathan Bridger's unexpected mercy. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles, and strained to hear what was being said below. Absolutely inappropriate, Nathan, and you know it. That was Ruth Carson, her voice sharp with disapproval. What was I supposed to do? Leave her to freeze. Nathan's response was quieter, but no less firm. You were supposed to bring her to the hotel or the boarding house, like any sensible person would. Both were full. You know they are. Half the territory comes through Silver Ridge for Christmas, and Harrison's been spreading poison about her. No decent establishment would take her in. A pause. Then Ruth again, softer this time. I know you meant well, but people will talk, Nathan. A single woman under your roof, no chaperone. You're here, that makes it proper enough. I'm your mother-in-law. People will say I'm biased, that I'd cover for you. Footsteps crossed the floor. I'm not questioning your intentions. I'm questioning what this town will do with them. Eleanor closed her eyes. Of course. She should have realized that Nathan's kindness would come with consequences he hadn't anticipated. Small towns had long memories and sharp tongues, and a widower taking in a woman with a scandalous reputation was exactly the kind of story that would spread faster than wildfire. She dressed quickly in yesterday's rumpled traveling dress, her only dress since her trunk had gone on to Robert Harrison's house, and she had no way of retrieving it now. Her hair was a disaster, but she did what she could with the pins she'd managed not to lose, and descended the stairs with her spine straight and her chin up. Both voices stopped when she appeared in the kitchen doorway. Miss Hartwell. Nathan stood near the stove, a coffee cup in his hand. He looked like he'd been up for hours, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows and his hair still damp from washing. I hope we didn't wake you. You didn't, and I apologize for causing difficulty. Eleanor met Ruth's eyes directly. Mrs. Carson is right. My presence here is inappropriate, and I should make other arrangements. There are no other arrangements, Nathan said flatly. Then I'll wait at the depot until the next train comes through. In this weather, the trains won't run for at least 3 days, maybe longer if the pass stays snowed in. He set down his cup. You'll stay here where it's warm and safe. Nathan, Ruth began. She stays, Ruth. I won't hear otherwise. The two of them locked eyes in what was clearly a continuation of an old argument, one that had nothing to do with Eleanor, and everything to do with whatever complicated history existed between a man and his dead wife's mother. Tommy saved them from further confrontation by bursting through the back door in a shower of snow, his cheeks red from cold and his eyes bright with excitement. Uncle Nate, the north fence is down. 3 posts snapped clean through, and there's cattle wandering toward the creek. Nathan was moving before the boy finished speaking, grabbing his coat from the hook and pulling on boots. How many head? Maybe a dozen. Bill's trying to turn them back, but they're spooked by something. Probably a cat. Mountain lions come down in winter when game gets scarce. Nathan was already halfway to the door. He paused, looked back at Eleanor. I apologize for the poor hospitality. Make yourself at home. Ruth will... I'll manage just fine. Ruth interrupted. Go, before we lose good breeding stock to a fall through ice. Nathan nodded and disappeared into the white brightness beyond the door, Tommy racing after him, despite Ruth's shouted objection about breakfast and proper coats. The kitchen fell silent, except for the crackle of the stove. Ruth turned to Eleanor with an expression that was impossible to read. Can you cook? Adequately. That's more than most Boston nurses can say. There's eggs in the basket, bacon in the cold box, and bread that needs slicing. Make yourself useful while I check on the preserves in the root cellar. It wasn't quite acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. Eleanor moved to the stove, grateful for something to do with her hands, besides wring them with anxiety. She'd just gotten the bacon sizzling when the front door opened and closed with a firmness that suggested someone who belonged here. A man's voice called out, weathered and cautious. Ruth, you got company. In the kitchen, Bill. The man who appeared in the doorway was perhaps 50, lean and sun-weathered, with the kind of face that suggested he'd spent more time talking to horses than people. He stopped short when he saw Eleanor. Ma'am. This is Miss Hartwell, Ruth said, emerging from the root cellar with a jar of something that might have been jam. She's staying with us for a few days. Miss Hartwell, this is Bill Crawford. He's foreman here, been working for Nathan since before Lily passed. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Crawford. Bill's eyes narrowed slightly. Hartwell, you're the nurse from Boston, the one Harrison was engaged to. I am. Heard some things about you in town yesterday. Things Harrison was saying. Eleanor's hands stilled on the bacon fork. I'm sure you did. Said you got yourself fired for making up stories about a doctor. Said you couldn't be trusted around decent folk. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Ruth's face had gone hard, but she said nothing, waiting to see how this would play out. Eleanor met Bill's gaze steadily. Dr. William Morrison at Boston General Hospital had a habit of putting his hands on young nurses without permission. I reported him. The hospital board chose to believe him over me and half a dozen other women who came forward. Make of that what you will. Bill studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded just once. My sister worked in a factory back in Pennsylvania. Foreman there had the same habit. She reported him too and got the same treatment. His voice was gruff. Any man who believes a woman would risk her livelihood for attention is a fool who's never met a woman. Something in Eleanor's chest loosened. Breakfast, she offered, suddenly near tears from this unexpected support. Yes, ma'am. I'd be obliged. They ate in companionable silence, Bill and Ruth trading comments about ranch business, while Eleanor listened and learned. The Bridger Ranch ran about 300 head of cattle and specialized in breeding workhorses, massive draft animals, that sold to mines and freight companies throughout the territory. Nathan's father had started the operation 30 years ago, and Nathan had inherited it along with the responsibility of raising his brother's son after a stampede killed Thomas Bridger 2 years back. Boy's doing well, Bill said around a mouthful of eggs. Needs a man's guidance, and Nathan's good with him. Patient. Too patient sometimes, Ruth said. That boy needs boundaries along with love. He's 10 years old and lost his father. He needs to know he's safe more than he needs discipline. Bill's tone was mild but firm. Nathan's doing right by him. Before Ruth could respond, the back door crashed open again. Tommy stood there breathing hard, his face pale beneath the windburn. Grandma Ruth, Uncle Nate says come quick. There's a man at the fence and he's got a gun. Eleanor's blood went cold. Ruth was already moving, grabbing a heavy shawl and a rifle from the rack near the door. Bill with me. Tommy, you stay inside with Miss Hartwell. But, inside, now. The boy's face crumpled with frustration, but he obeyed, stomping into the kitchen and throwing himself into a chair. Eleanor moved to the window, trying to see what was happening. Through the swirling snow, she could make out shapes near the fence line. Nathan stood facing another man across the posts, both of them rigid with tension. Ruth and Bill were approaching from behind Nathan Ruth's rifle, held with the casual competence of someone who knew how to use it. Is that Robert Harrison? Eleanor asked quietly. Tommy pressed his face against the window beside her. Yeah. He comes around sometimes making trouble. Says Uncle Nate's land should belong to his family by rights. On what grounds? Something about old claims from before the war. Uncle Nate's father filed proper, but Harrison's grandfather said the land was promised to him first. Tommy's voice dropped. Nobody believes him except Colonel Thornton, and that's because Thornton wants to buy the land himself. Eleanor filed away the name Thornton for later consideration, and focused on the scene unfolding outside. Even from a distance, she could see Robert Harrison's face was flushed with anger, could see the way his hand kept dropping toward the pistol at his hip. We should be able to hear them, Tommy said suddenly. There's a window in the study that's closer. Uncle Nate keeps it cracked even in winter so the room doesn't get musty. He led Eleanor through the house to a small room lined with books and papers, where a window did indeed stand open just enough to let in voices along with the cold air. No right to keep her here. That was Robert, his voice high and tight with rage. Miss Hartwell is a guest in my home. Nathan's voice was level-controlled. She's free to leave whenever she chooses. Until then, she's under my protection. Protection from what I'm her fiancé. You ended the engagement. Your words, your choice. That means you've got no claim on her. She's a liar and a troublemaker. I've got every right to make sure she doesn't spread her poison in this town. Eleanor flinched. Tommy's hand found hers small and warm and surprisingly steady. Don't listen to him, the boy whispered. He's mean and everybody knows it. From the fence line, Ruth's voice cut through the argument like a knife. Robert Harrison, You put that gun away before I put a hole in your hat to let the hot air out. This doesn't concern you, Mrs. Carson. A man threatening my employer on his own land, that concerns me plenty. Ruth's rifle didn't waver. Now state your business or get gone. We've got work to do. Robert's face twisted with something ugly. My business is with the woman you're harboring. Miss Hartwell owes me an explanation for the embarrassment she's caused my family. I owe you nothing. Eleanor hadn't meant to speak, hadn't meant to get involved, but the words burst out before she could stop them. She pushed open the study window fully and leaned out into the cold. You ended our engagement based on gossip without even asking for my side of the story. You owe me an apology, if anything. Robert's eyes found her, and the hatred in them was almost physical. You destroyed a good man's reputation with your lies. I told the truth about what Dr. Morrison did. The fact that people chose not to believe me doesn't make it less true. You're a disgrace to decent women everywhere. And you're a coward who can't stand by someone the moment it becomes inconvenient. Eleanor's voice rose despite her intention to stay calm. You wrote me letters about love and partnership, about building a life together. But the first time that life required you to show some backbone, you folded like a cheap suit. Nathan had turned to look at her, something that might have been admiration flickering across his face. Bill was grinning openly. Even Ruth's stern expression had softened into something that looked almost like pride. Robert, on the other hand, looked like he might explode. You'll regret this, both of you. He swung his gaze from Eleanor to Nathan. Bridger, you take her side. You're making an enemy of every respectable family in this territory. Then I guess I'll have to live with that, Nathan said calmly. Colonel Thornton won't like it. He's got plans for this land, and he doesn't take kindly to people who oppose him. Thornton can take his plans, and... Nathan stopped himself with visible effort. Tell the colonel I'm not interested in selling, and I'm not interested in his opinion about my house guests. Robert's hand moved toward his gun. Bill's rifle came up in the same instant. Don't. The moment stretched out taut as a wire. Eleanor realized she was holding her breath, her hand gripping Tommy's so tight, the boy made a small sound of protest. Then Robert seemed to deflate his hand, falling away from his weapon. This isn't over, Bridger. You're protecting a woman of loose morals, and people will hear about it. The whole town will know you're keeping her here unchaperoned. Ruth Carson lives under this roof. That's chaperone enough for anyone with sense. Nathan's voice had gone quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous. Now get off my land before I have Bill escort you off at gunpoint. Robert wheeled his horse around and spurred it toward town snow, flying from its hooves. The three figures at the fence line stood watching until he disappeared into the white distance. Eleanor sagged against the window frame, suddenly shaking. He was going to draw. Tommy said, his voice small and scared. He almost drew on Uncle Nate. But he didn't. Eleanor tried to make her voice steady. Your uncle handled it. This time. But Mr. Harrison's got friends. Rich friends who don't like Uncle Nate because he won't sell them the ranch. Tommy looked up at her with eyes too old for his face. Are you really going to stay, even though it'll cause trouble? Eleanor wanted to lie, wanted to promise she'd leave and take the trouble with her. But this boy had already lost too much to lies, even comfortable ones. I don't know yet, Tommy. That depends on a lot of things. Do you want to stay? The question hit her unexpectedly hard. Did she want to stay, in this house that smelled like pine and bread, with these people who'd offered help without asking for anything in return, in this frozen wilderness that was nothing like the life she'd planned? I think I might, she said slowly, if I'm welcome. If my being here doesn't cause your uncle more problems than he deserves. Tommy's face broke into a grin. You're welcome. I heard Uncle Nate tell Grandma Ruth this morning that you had courage, and courage is always welcome at Bridger Ranch. Before Eleanor could respond, the back door opened and closed. Footsteps in the hall. Then Nathan appeared in the study doorway. His face was grim, but his eyes went immediately to Eleanor, checking that she was unharmed. I apologize for that scene. You have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who brought trouble to your door. Harrison brought trouble to my door. You just gave him an excuse to let it out. Nathan moved to close the window Eleanor had opened. though I appreciate you telling him exactly what kind of coward he is. That was satisfying to hear. Despite everything, Eleanor felt her lips twitch. My mother would be horrified. She raised me to be a proper lady. Your mother raised you to speak truth. That's better than proper any day. Ruth appeared behind Nathan, still carrying her rifle. That boy's going to make trouble. He and Thornton both. Let them try. Nathan's voice was flat. This is Bridger land bought and paid for. They've got no legal claim to it. Legal and actual are two different things when you've got money and connections. Ruth's face was troubled. Thornton's been buying up land all around here, making offers people can't refuse. Sooner or later, he's going to push harder than threats. Then I'll push back. Nathan looked at Eleanor. But Miss Hartwell shouldn't have to be part of that fight. If you want to leave, if you want to go somewhere safer. Where? Eleanor asked simply. I have $3 no references that anyone will believe, and a reputation that's been destroyed twice over. There is nowhere safer, Mr. Bridger. There's just here or the street. The brutal honesty seemed to strike him silent. Then you'll stay, Ruth said firmly, and we'll deal with whatever comes. But Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor? Please. Eleanor, you need to understand what you're walking into. This territory is changing fast. Railroads coming through, which means land values are rising, which means men like Thornton see opportunity in forcing people off their claims. Nathan's father bought this land fair and square, but there's been questions raised about the original filing, about whether proper procedure was followed. Nothing that would hold up in a real court, but enough to cause delays and legal fees and trouble. What kind of questions? Nathan answered, his voice tight. Questions about whether my father lived on the land continuously during the proving period. Questions about whether improvements were made according to statute. Questions about whether a man who'd fought for the Union had the right to claim land in territory that was officially neutral but Confederate sympathizing. That's absurd. The Homestead Act applied to any citizen who'd never taken up arms against the United States. You know that, I know that. But Thornton's got a lawyer from back east who's good at making simple things complicated. Nathan rubbed his face tiredly. He's offered to buy me out 3 times now. Fair price, he says, for a property that might not legally be mine. Each time I refuse, the legal pressure increases. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. And my being here gives him more ammunition, a moral failing to add to the legal questions. That's about the size of it, Bill said from the doorway. He'd followed Ruth inside, tracking snow across the clean floor. Sorry, Ruth. Harrison spread word all over town that Bridger's keeping a fallen woman under his roof. By tonight, every respectable family in Silver Ridge will be talking about it. Let them talk, Nathan said. Talk turns into testimony if this goes to a territorial judge, Ruth pointed out. Character matters in land disputes. If Thornton can paint you as morally unfit, it strengthens his claim that you're not a proper steward of the property. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Eleanor's presence here compromised Nathan's reputation, which compromised his legal standing, which gave Thornton exactly what he needed to challenge the land claim. And the only way to avoid it was for Eleanor to leave, which would mean certain destitution for her and moral victory for the men who'd already destroyed her life once. There might be a solution, Eleanor heard herself say, though it's not one any of us will like. 4 pairs of eyes turned to her. What kind of solution? Nathan asked. Eleanor took a deep breath. We get married. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Ruth laughed sharp and short. That's your solution. Jump from the frying pan straight into the fire. Think about it. A wife can't compromise her husband's morals. My presence here becomes respectable overnight. And as Mrs. Bridger, I'd have legal standing to help defend the property claim. You'd also be trapped, Nathan said quietly. Married to a stranger, tied to a place you didn't choose with no way out if things go wrong. As opposed to my current situation, which is so much better. Eleanor met his eyes. I'm practical, Mr. Bridger. This solves both our problems. You get respectability and an extra pair of hands to help with whatever fight is coming. I get safety and purpose. It's a business arrangement, nothing more. Marriage is more than a business arrangement. Your marriage was. Mine would be different. She was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I've already lost one engagement to scandal. I'm not fool enough to expect romance at this point, but partnership, mutual benefit. Those I understand." Tommy looked between them with wide eyes. "Are you really going to marry Uncle Nate?" Eleanor stopped. "That depends on whether he agrees to the arrangement." Nathan had gone very still, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words were carefully measured. "You'd be taking on more than you know. This ranch is remote, the work is hard, and the winters are brutal. You'd be isolated for months at a time, and if Thornton escalates his campaign, you could be in actual danger." "I'm already in danger, Mr. Bridger. At least here I'd be in danger with people who've shown me kindness." "And what would you want from this arrangement? Besides safety?" The question surprised her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what would make this tolerable for you? What would you need to not regret the choice?" Eleanor considered. "Respect. Honest communication. The freedom to be useful rather than ornamental. And the understanding that this is a partnership of equals, not a rescue." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes. "And if I wanted more than a business arrangement eventually, if I wanted a real marriage—" Her heart jumped uncomfortably. "Then we'd discuss it, like partners do." "Uncle Nate," Tommy said, urgently tugging on Nathan's sleeve. "Say yes. Please, Miss Eleanor's nice, and she makes good eggs, and Mr. Harrison won't be able to say mean things about us anymore if she's family." Ruth made a sound that might have been exasperation or amusement. "Lord have mercy, you're actually considering this insanity." "I'm considering that it solves multiple problems at once," Nathan said. "And that Eleanor's right, it would give her legal standing to help defend the claim. A wife's testimony carries weight. A temporary house guest's doesn't." "It's too fast," Ruth protested. "You barely know each other. I knew Lily for 3 months before I proposed. You didn't object then. That was different. You loved Lily. And I respected her, which is a better foundation for marriage than romance, according to my mother." Nathan looked at Eleanor. "She used to say love was what happened after you'd chosen to build a life with someone, not before." "Wise woman," Eleanor said softly. The wind rattled the windows, punctuating the moment. Outside, the storm was building again, snow falling thick and fast. Inside, the house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a decision that would change everything. "All right," Nathan said finally. "If you're certain this is what you want, we'll do it. We'll get married as soon as the storm breaks and we can get to town. But Eleanor—" He waited until she met his eyes. "This isn't a business contract you can walk away from if it gets difficult. Marriage is permanent. I need you to understand that." "I understand." "And you're sure? Absolutely sure?" Eleanor thought about Boston, about Dr. Morrison's hands, and the hospital board's dismissal, about Robert Harrison's cowardice, and $3 in her pocket and nowhere else to turn. Then she thought about this house, these people, the unexpected kindness of strangers who'd become something more. "I'm sure." Nathan nodded slowly. Then he extended his hand formal, as a business deal. "Then we have an agreement, Miss Hartwell." Eleanor took his hand, feeling the calluses and warmth and strength of it. "We do, Mr. Bridger." Tommy let out a whoop and threw his arms around both of them, nearly knocking Eleanor off balance. Ruth muttered something about insanity and stubbornness, and Bridger men never doing anything the sensible way. Bill just grinned and said he'd go tell the Hands there'd be a wedding, and wasn't that something to celebrate on a cold winter day? As the chaos swirled around her, Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Not happiness exactly, and certainly not the romantic joy she'd once imagined for her wedding day, but something solid and real and strangely right. She'd come west looking for security and found scandal instead. But maybe, just maybe, she'd found something better. A purpose. A place. A chance to build something meaningful from the ashes of everything she'd lost. The storm howled outside, but inside Bridger Ranch there was warmth and light, and the sound of a family beginning to form around the edges of a practical arrangement. It would have to be enough. The storm broke 2 days later, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline white silence. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching Nathan and Bill dig out the barn, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. She'd been at Bridger Ranch for 72 hours, and in that time, her entire future had been decided over breakfast eggs and a handshake. "You're having second thoughts." Ruth's voice came from behind her, not quite a question. "Wouldn't you be?" "I'd be terrified." Ruth moved to stand beside her, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "But terror and wrong aren't the same thing." Eleanor glanced at the older woman. "You don't approve of this arrangement." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. You've been watching me like I'm a fox in the henhouse, ever since Nathan agreed." Ruth was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the men outside. "My daughter loved that man with everything she had, and he loved her the same way. Watching them together was like watching two halves of the same soul find each other." Her voice went soft. "When she died, something in Nathan died with her. For 5 years I've watched him go through the motions of living without actually being alive. And now here you come and suddenly he's making decisions, taking risks, showing fight again. You're afraid I'll hurt him. I'm afraid you'll wake him up just enough to make it hurt worse when you leave." Eleanor turned to face Ruth fully. "I'm not leaving. I gave my word." "Words are easy. Living up to them when things get hard, that's what counts." Ruth's gaze was sharp, assessing. "You've been hurt, Eleanor, badly, by men who should have protected you. I understand that. But Nathan's been hurt too, and he's got a boy depending on him who can't take another loss. So I need to know, are you marrying my son-in-law because you want to build something real, or because you're running from something broken?" The question struck deeper than Eleanor expected. She thought about Dr. Morrison's hands, about the hospital board's dismissal, about Robert Harrison's telegram crumpling in her frozen fingers. She thought about $3 and nowhere to go, and the very real possibility that she'd have died on that depot platform if Nathan hadn't stopped. "Both," she said finally. "I'm running from something broken, and I'm trying to build something real. Can't it be both?" Ruth studied her for a long moment. Then unexpectedly she smiled. "Yes, I suppose it can." She turned back to her bread dough, kneading with practiced efficiency. "The Reverend will be able to perform the ceremony tomorrow if the roads stay clear. I've got Lily's wedding dress packed away upstairs. You're taller than she was, but I can let down the hem." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "You'd let me wear Lily's dress?" She'd want it used. Lily believed in practical love, not sentimental hoarding. Ruth's hand stilled on the dough. "But Eleanor, understand this. That dress represents a promise. Not just to Nathan, but to this family. To Tommy, who needs stability more than he needs another person walking away. To this land which will demand everything you have and more. To the fight that's coming, because Thornton won't let this go quietly." "I understand. I hope you do." The back door banged open and Tommy burst in, trailing snow and excitement. "Miss Eleanor, Uncle Nate says you should come see the horses. We've got a mare that's going to foal any day now, and she's the prettiest thing you ever saw." Eleanor let herself be dragged outside, grateful for the interruption. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but Tommy's enthusiasm was infectious as he pulled her toward the barn. Inside, the air was warm with animal heat and smelled of hay and leather. Nathan was checking a chestnut mare's legs, his hands gentle and sure. He looked up when they entered, and something crossed his face, surprise maybe, or pleasure at seeing her venture out. "Tommy thinks you need to meet Duchess," he said, straightening. "Fair warning, she's got opinions about strangers." "Don't we all?" Eleanor approached slowly, extending her hand for the mare to sniff. Duchess regarded her with dark, intelligent eyes, then apparently decided Eleanor was acceptable, and nuzzled her palm. "She likes you," Tommy crowed. "She bit Mr. Harrison last time he was here." "Smart horse," Nathan murmured, then louder. "Tommy, go help Bill with the water troughs. I need to talk to Miss Hartwell." The boy's face fell with dramatic disappointment, but he obeyed, trudging toward the back of the barn. Nathan waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. "Ruth told me what she said to you, about making sure you understand what you're getting into. She's protecting you. I don't fault her for that. I don't need protecting." Nathan's voice was quiet but firm. "And neither do you. What we need is honesty about what this arrangement is and isn't." Eleanor braced herself. All right, what is it? It's a partnership. Equal say in decisions about the ranch, about Tommy, about our lives. It's respect even when we disagree. It's standing together when trouble comes, because it will come. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What it isn't is a love match. I can't promise you romance or poetry or whatever it was you expected with Harrison. I can promise you honesty, loyalty, and a home for as long as you want one. That's more than Robert ever promised. Then he was a fool. Nathan's gray eyes held hers. But Eleanor, you need to know something else. Thornton won't let this go. He wants this land, and he's got resources I don't have. Money, lawyers, connections in the territorial government. This marriage will protect your reputation, but it might also put you in the line of fire. What kind of fire? Nathan was quiet for a moment, stroking Duchess's neck. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain. Lily died in this barn. Not from childbirth complications like people think. From a fall she took when someone left the hayloft ladder sabotaged. She was 8 months pregnant, came out to check on a sick calf, and the ladder gave way under her weight. Eleanor felt ice form in her veins. Someone sabotaged it. I can't prove it. Bill checked the ladder afterward, said the break was clean like it had been sawed partway through. But there were no witnesses, no evidence that would hold up legally. The territorial marshal called it an accident. Nathan's jaw was tight. But 3 weeks before she died, Thornton had made his first offer to buy the ranch, and Lily was the one who told him no, told him Bridger land wasn't for sale at any price. You think Thornton killed your wife? I think Thornton wants this land badly enough that people who stand in his way tend to have accidents. Nathan met her eyes. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're marrying into. This isn't just about respectability or business arrangements. It could be dangerous. Eleanor thought about Boston, about standing before the hospital board and knowing her career was over, but speaking truth anyway. About choosing conscience over safety, even when the cost was everything she'd worked for. I've been in danger before, she said quietly. At least here, I'd know who my enemies are. Something flickered in Nathan's expression. Respect maybe, or the beginning of something deeper. All right then. Tomorrow we'll ride into town and make this official. But tonight, I think we should tell Tommy properly. He deserves to understand what's happening. They found the boy in the tack room, supposedly organizing bridles, but actually carving something into a piece of scrap wood with a knife that looked too large for his hands. He looked up guiltily when they entered. I'm not making a mess, Uncle Nate. I promise I'll clean up. What are you making? Eleanor asked. Tommy held up the wood shyly. It was rough, but recognizable, a horse mid-gallop with careful detail in the mane and tail. It's supposed to be Duchess, for when her foal comes, so I can remember what she looked like before. It's beautiful, Tommy. Really? His face lit up. Pa used to carve. He made me a whole set of animals before he died. I'm trying to learn, but I'm not very good yet. Nathan knelt beside his nephew, his voice gentle. You're better than you think. Your father would be proud. He paused. Tommy, Miss Hartwell and I need to talk to you about something important. The boy's eyes went wide. Are you really getting married? Yes. Tomorrow, if Reverend Murphy can perform the ceremony. And Miss Eleanor will stay here forever. That's the plan. Tommy launched himself at Eleanor with enough force to make her stumble. His arms wrapped around her waist, his face pressed against her coat, and she felt him trembling. Hey now, she said softly, her hand finding his hair. What's this about? I don't want you to leave like Ma did. His voice was muffled against her coat. Everybody leaves. Eleanor's heart cracked. She knelt down to his level, taking his face in her hands. Tommy, look at me. I'm making a promise to your uncle tomorrow, and I don't break promises. I'm staying. You understand? But what if something bad happens? What if the ladder breaks again, or... Tommy. Nathan's voice was rough with emotion. Nothing's going to happen to Miss Eleanor. I won't let it. You couldn't stop it before. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nathan flinched as if struck, and Eleanor saw the guilt he carried written across his face. He blamed himself for Lily's death, for not being there, for not protecting her. No, Nathan said quietly. I couldn't stop it before. But I've learned from that mistake. This time, I'll be more careful. We all will be. Promise? Tommy's voice was small. I promise. The boy seemed to accept this, wiping his eyes on his sleeve. Can I call her Aunt Eleanor after you're married? If she doesn't mind. Tommy looked at Eleanor hopefully. She felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd been maintaining since Boston crumbling under the weight of this child's need. I'd like that very much. They walked back to the house through snow that crunched beneath their boots, Tommy chattering between them about wedding plans and whether there would be cake, and could he please wear his Sunday suit even though it was getting too small. The normalcy of it felt surreal against the backdrop of sabotaged ladders and dangerous enemies. That evening, Ruth pulled out Lily's wedding dress. It was simpler than Eleanor expected, cream-colored wool with pearl buttons and lace at the collar, practical enough for frontier life, but beautiful in its simplicity. She made it herself. Ruth set her fingers gentle on the fabric. Spent 6 months on the lacework. Said if she was going to marry a rancher, she wanted a dress she could actually move in. Eleanor touched the lace carefully. It's lovely. Try it on. I need to see where to let down the hem. In the privacy of the guest room, Eleanor slipped into the dress. It fit surprisingly well through the bodice, though Ruth was right about the length. She stared at herself in the small mirror, seeing a stranger in a dead woman's dress about to marry a man she'd known for 3 days. A knock on the door made her turn. Come in. Ruth entered carrying a sewing basket. She stopped short when she saw Eleanor, her face doing something complicated. You look like her, not in features but in the way you hold yourself. Lily had that same stubborn set to her jaw. I'm sorry. I know this must be difficult. Stop apologizing. Ruth's voice was sharp. Lily's gone. I've made my peace with that even if Nathan hasn't. But you're here and you're willing to stand beside him when another woman would run. That counts for something. She knelt to pin the hem, her movements practiced and sure. After a moment, she spoke again, quieter. I need to tell you something about Colonel Thornton. Something Nathan might not because he's trying to protect you, fool man. Eleanor waited. Thornton didn't just want this land, he wanted Lily. Made her an offer to leave Nathan, set her up proper in Denver, give her a life easier than what a rancher's wife could expect. She laughed in his face. Told him she'd rather die poor with a good man than live rich with a snake. And 2 weeks later the ladder broke. 3 weeks, but yes. Ruth's hands stilled on the hem. Thornton's got a pattern. When he wants something and can't buy it, he finds ways to make it available. A barn fire here, a herd stampede there, always just accident enough that no one can prove otherwise. And if you stand in his way, you tend to have accidents too. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow you'll be Eleanor Bridger, and that means Thornton will see you as an obstacle. A wife has legal standing, a house guest doesn't. Your testimony could help Nathan defend his claim. That makes you dangerous to Thornton's plans. Ruth looked up, her eyes fierce. So you need to be careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't trust strangers. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. Eleanor absorbed this feeling, the weight of what she was stepping into. Does Nathan know you're warning me? Nathan knows I'm practical. He'd do the same if he thought you'd listen. I'll listen. I'm not stupid enough to ignore warnings just because they're inconvenient. Ruth smiled grimly. Good. Then we might just survive what's coming. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day where the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. Eleanor dressed in Lily's altered wedding dress, her hands shaking only slightly as she fastened the pearl buttons. Ruth had found a sprig of pine to pin in her hair, and Tommy had presented her with a handkerchief embroidered with wildflowers that had belonged to his mother. For something borrowed, he said solemnly. Ma would want you to have it. They rode to town in the wagon Bill driving while Nathan sat beside Eleanor in the back. Tommy wedged between them, radiating excitement. The boy had been up since dawn polishing Nathan's Sunday boots and making sure everyone looked proper for church. Silver Ridge was larger than Eleanor expected. Maybe 200 people spread across a main street lined with false-fronted buildings. The church stood at the end of town, white-painted and simple with a bell tower that reached toward the clear sky. Reverend Josiah Murphy met them at the door, a weathered Irishman in his 50s with kind eyes and a forthright manner. "Nathan, Mrs. Carson, and you must be Miss Hartwell." His handshake was firm. "I'll be honest, I've heard some talk about you in town. Most of it from Robert Harrison, none of it charitable." "I imagine not. Harrison's a fool and a coward, and I've told him so to his face." Murphy's brogue was thick with disapproval. "Any man who'd abandon a woman in a blizzard over gossip isn't worth the air he breathes. You're better off with Bridger here." "That remains to be seen," Eleanor said with a slight smile. Murphy laughed. "I like her, Nathan. She's got spine." They entered the church, and Eleanor was surprised to see it wasn't empty. A dozen people sat scattered across the pews, Bill Crawford and the other ranch hands, a few townspeople she didn't recognize, and in the front row a couple who looked to be in their 30s. Nathan followed her gaze. "Sam and Ann Hartford. They run the farm north of here. Good people." Ann Hartford rose and approached her smile warm. "Miss Hartwell, welcome to Silver Ridge. I know the circumstances are unusual, but I wanted you to know there are folks in this town who judge people by their character, not their gossip." "Thank you, Mrs. Hartford." "Ann, please. We're neighbors now, or will be soon enough." She glanced at Nathan. "And for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, both of you." The ceremony itself was brief. Reverend Murphy spoke about partnership and covenant, about choosing to build something lasting in a hard land, about the kind of love that came from shared purpose, rather than romantic fancy. His words were practical and real, stripped of sentimentality, but full of truth. When he asked if Nathan took Eleanor as his lawfully wedded wife, Nathan's "I do" was firm and clear. When he asked Eleanor the same, she looked into Nathan's gray eyes and saw steadiness there, reliability, the promise of a man who kept his word. "I do." The ring Nathan slipped onto her finger was simple gold, worn smooth with age. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "If you'd rather have something new, it's perfect." They sealed the marriage with a kiss that was chaste and brief, appropriate for a business arrangement witnessed by friends and neighbors. But Eleanor felt something shift as their lips met, some understanding passing between them that went deeper than words. Tommy cheered, Bill whistled, and Ann Hartford dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. They signed the marriage register in Reverend Murphy's neat script, making it official in the eyes of law and church. Eleanor Hartwell became Eleanor Bridger in a ceremony that lasted less than 20 minutes, standing in a borrowed dress, beside a man she barely knew, promising to build a life from the ruins of everything she'd lost. As they left the church, Ann Hartford pressed a small package into Eleanor's hands. "A wedding gift. Just some preserves and bread, but I wanted you to have something to mark the day." "You're very kind. I'm practical. New wives need friends, especially when they're marrying into complicated situations." Ann's voice dropped. "If you need anything, and I mean anything, you send word. Sam and I don't have much, but what we have we share." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion from the street drew everyone's attention. A black carriage had pulled up in front of the church, expensive and out of place in this frontier town. The door opened, and a man stepped out. Colonel Beauregard Thornton was perhaps 50, with silver hair and the upright bearing of career military. His Confederate gray coat was immaculate despite the muddy streets, and his pale blue eyes swept across the assembled group with cold assessment. "Bridger," he said, his voice cultured and southern soft. "I heard you were getting married. Thought I'd offer my congratulations." "We don't need your congratulations, Thornton." Nathan's voice had gone flat. "Now is that any way to greet a neighbor?" Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And you must be the former Miss Hartwell. I've heard so much about you from young Harrison." "Colonel." Eleanor kept her voice neutral, but she could feel tension radiating from Nathan beside her. "A hasty marriage." Thornton continued, his tone conversational. "Some might say suspiciously so. One wonders what circumstances might require such urgency." "One might mind one's own business," Ruth said sharply from behind them. Thornton's gaze shifted to her, something ugly flickering across his face before his pleasant mask settled back into place. "Mrs. Carson, still playing nursemaid to your son-in-law, I see. How devoted." State your business or move along, Nathan said quietly. We've got celebrating to do. My business is simple. I'm here to make you one final offer for your land. Generous terms more than fair market value. Enough to set you and your new bride up comfortable anywhere in the territory. Thornton pulled a paper from his coat. All legal and proper, drawn up by my attorney. The answer's no. Same as it's been every other time you've asked. Nathan, be reasonable. The railroad's coming through this valley. I've got it on good authority. The line will run right through your northern pasture. The territorial government will take that land by eminent domain if you don't sell willingly. Better to profit now than lose it for pennies later. Eleanor felt Nathan tense beside her. You seem awful certain about where that railroad's going. I have connections in Helena. They keep me informed. Thornton's smile was sharp. Point is, your land will be taken one way or another. I'm offering you a chance to walk away with dignity and money intact. Or, the single word was quiet but dangerous. Or things get complicated. Questions about your title, about whether proper homesteading requirements were met. Questions about moral fitness to maintain a claim, particularly now that you've married a woman of questionable reputation. Thornton's eyes flicked to Eleanor. No offense intended, Mrs. Bridger. Plenty taken, Eleanor said coolly. I'm giving you 1 week to consider my offer, Thornton continued, as if she hadn't spoken. After that, I'll be filing formal challenges to your claim with the Territorial Land Office. And trust me, Bridger, you don't want this fight. I've got resources you can't match, and patience you can't outlast. Then I guess we'll see who's more stubborn. Thornton's pleasant facade cracked slightly. You're making a mistake. A costly one. That's my right as a property owner. For now. Thornton climbed back into his carriage. 1 week, Bridger. Think about it carefully. Think about what you stand to lose. The carriage pulled away, leaving behind ruts in the muddy street and a tension thick enough to cut. Reverend Murphy broke the silence first. That man's got a cold soul. He's dangerous, Ann Hartford said quietly. Sam heard from the territorial marshal that Thornton's been buying up land all through this valley. Anyone who refuses his offers seems to have unfortunate accidents. Like Lily, Tommy said, his voice small. Nathan's hand found the boy's shoulder. We're not having this conversation today. Today's supposed to be about celebration, not worry. But the celebration felt hollow after Thornton's visit. They returned to the ranch in subdued silence, and even Ruth's attempt at a wedding dinner couldn't shake the shadow that had fallen over the day. That night, Eleanor stood in what was now her bedroom. Nathan had insisted she take the larger room, while he moved to the smaller one down the hall. Through the window she could see the barn where Lily had died, could imagine the terror of falling while pregnant, the knowledge that you were dying and taking your unborn child with you. A soft knock on the door made her turn. Come in. Nathan entered, still in his wedding clothes, looking uncertain in a way she hadn't seen before. I wanted to make sure you were all right. After Thornton's threats. I've survived worse threats. Maybe, but those threats weren't backed by money and territorial connections. He moved to stand beside her at the window. Eleanor, I need you to understand something. If you want to leave, if this is too much, I'll help you get somewhere safe. Give you money, references, whatever you need. You don't have to stay just because we went through with the ceremony. Eleanor looked at him. This man who'd saved her from freezing, who'd offered shelter without asking for anything in return, who was now trying to give her an escape route from the very marriage she'd proposed. Do you want me to leave? No. God, no. The words came out raw. But I won't trap you in something that might get you killed. I'm already trapped, Nathan. By reputation, by lack of options, by a world that punishes women for speaking truth. She turned to face him fully. At least here, I'm trapped with someone decent. Someone who keeps his word. That's more than I've had in a long time. Something in his expression shifted. I will keep my word, Eleanor. Whatever comes, I'll stand beside you. Then we'll stand together. Partners like we agreed. Partners, he echoed. Then hesitantly, may I kiss you properly this time, not for show. Eleanor's heart jumped. Why? Because you're my wife, and I'd like to mark that somehow. But only if you're willing. She studied his face, seeing sincerity there, not demand. Seeing a man asking permission, rather than taking what he thought he was owed. All right. This kiss was different from the brief ceremony press of lips. Nathan's hand came up to cup her face gentle and warm, and his mouth moved over hers with careful attention. Eleanor felt heat spread through her, unexpected and startling, and when they broke apart, she was breathing hard. I should let you rest, Nathan said, his voice rough. It's been a long day. After he left, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the simple gold band on her finger. She'd married a stranger to save her reputation and found herself bound to a man who might actually be worth the risk. But outside in the darkness, enemies were gathering, and the price of this marriage might be higher than either of them had imagined. Tomorrow, she'd start learning to be a rancher's wife. Tonight, she'd let herself feel the strange mix of hope and terror that came from choosing an unknown future over a certain disaster. The wind rattled her window, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Eleanor pulled Lily's quilt around her shoulders and tried not to think about sabotaged ladders and cold-eyed colonels and the very real possibility that she'd traded one kind of danger for another. But she'd made her choice, and she'd live with it. That's what Bridgers did. Eleanor woke to screaming. She was out of bed and running before her mind fully registered what she'd heard, her feet bare on the cold floorboards, her nightgown tangling around her legs. The screams were coming from Tommy's room, high and desperate and wrong. Nathan was already there when she burst through the door, kneeling beside the bed, where Tommy thrashed and fought against invisible enemies. The boy's face was flushed with fever, his eyes open, but unseeing, his whole body convulsing with shivers despite the quilts piled on top of him. How long has he been like this? Eleanor demanded, her nurse's training kicking in as she pressed her hand to Tommy's forehead. The heat radiating from his skin was alarming. I don't know. His crying woke me maybe 5 minutes ago. Nathan's voice was tight with fear. Eleanor, what's wrong with him? She pulled back Tommy's eyelid, checking his pupils, then ran her hands along his neck, feeling for swelling. When did he start feeling poorly? He complained of a headache at dinner, said his stomach hurt. I thought maybe he'd just eaten too much cake. Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities. The fever was too high too fast for a simple stomach upset. She pulled down the quilts and lifted Tommy's nightshirt, her breath catching when she saw the rash spreading across his abdomen. Ruth, she called out. I need clean water cloths and whatever willow bark you have in the house, now. The older woman appeared in the doorway, took one look at Tommy, and disappeared without questions. Eleanor turned back to Nathan. Help me get him to the kitchen. We need to cool him down before the fever causes permanent damage. Between them, they carried the boy downstairs, Tommy still fighting and crying out in his delirium. Eleanor had Nathan hold him in a chair while she stripped off the sweat-soaked nightshirt and began sponging him down with cool water Ruth brought from the pump. What is it? Nathan asked, his voice raw. What's making him like this? I think it's scarlet fever. The rash, the high temperature, the rapid onset. It all fits. Eleanor worked quickly, her hand steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. In Boston, I saw cases like this. Children would be fine one day and burning up the next. How do we treat it? We cool the fever, keep fluids in him, and pray. She looked up at Nathan, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes. I'm not going to lie to you. This is serious. Children die from scarlet fever, especially when the fever spikes this high. No. The word came out flat and absolute. Not Tommy. I can't lose him too. Eleanor wanted to promise that everything would be fine, that Tommy would recover, that they'd caught it in time. But she'd learned the hard way that false comfort helped no one. Then we fight, she said instead. But Nathan, you need to prepare yourself. The next few hours will tell us whether he's strong enough to beat this. Ruth appeared with an armful of supplies, cloths, a basin dried willow bark for tea, and a bottle of something that smelled medicinal. This is all we've got. Bill's riding to fetch Doc Preston from town, But in this snow, he won't make it back before morning. Then we work with what we have. Eleanor crushed the willow bark and poured boiling water over it, letting it steep while she continued cooling Tommy's skin. The boy had stopped thrashing, but his stillness was almost worse than the fighting. He lay limp in Nathan's arms, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Tommy." Eleanor leaned close to his ear, pitching her voice to cut through the fever haze. "Tommy, can you hear me? I need you to drink something." No response. She tried again, louder this time. "Thomas Bridger, you listen to me. You're going to drink this tea, and you're going to fight this fever, and you're going to get better. Do you understand?" A flicker behind his eyelids. His lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. "That's it. Come on, Tommy. Come back to us." She held the cup to his lips, tilting it carefully. "Just a sip. That's all I need." He swallowed, choked, coughed, but some of the liquid went down, and that was enough to build on. Over the next hour, Eleanor managed to get half the cup into him, alternating between willowbark tea and plain water. Always talking, always encouraging, always refusing to let him slip away into unconscious darkness. Nathan held his nephew through all of it, his arms steady even when his face showed the strain. Ruth moved around them with quiet efficiency, bringing fresh water, wringing out cloths, keeping the stove fed so the kitchen stayed warm. "Tell me about Boston." Nathan's voice broke the tense silence. "Tell me about the cases you treated there." Eleanor understood what he was asking. He needed reassurance that she knew what she was doing, that Tommy was in capable hands. So she talked, describing the hospital ward where she'd worked, the children she'd nursed through fevers and infections, the techniques she'd learned from doctors who actually respected her skill. There was a girl about Tommy's age who came in with scarlet fever worse than this. Her mother brought her in too late after the fever had been raging for 2 days. I thought we'd lose her. Eleanor sponged Tommy's chest, watching his breathing. But she was stubborn. Fought that fever like it was a personal enemy. 3 days later, she walked out of the hospital demanding pancakes. "Tommy's stubborn too," Nathan said quietly. "Gets it from his father. Thomas was the most pig-headed man I ever knew." "Tell me about him." So Nathan talked, his voice rough with memory and grief, about a brother who'd been his best friend, about teaching Thomas to ride and rope and read, about the day Thomas brought home a bride and became a father, about the stupid accident that had killed him too young. "Stampede," Nathan said. "Thomas was trying to turn the herd before they ran into a ravine. His horse went down and he went under the hooves. Bill found him after, brought him home so we could bury him proper." His arms tightened around Tommy. "This boy is all I have left of my brother. I can't lose him." "You won't." Eleanor made the promise, even though she had no right to, even though she knew better than to tempt fate with certainty. "I won't let you." The hours crawled past. Tommy's fever stayed dangerously high despite their efforts, and twice Eleanor thought they'd lost him, when his breathing went so shallow she couldn't see his chest move. But each time he rallied his small body, fighting with a determination that broke her heart and gave her hope in equal measure. Dawn was breaking when Tommy's eyes finally opened, clear and focused for the first time since the fever struck. "Aunt Eleanor." His voice was barely a whisper. "Why am I in the kitchen?" Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "Because you gave us quite a scare, young man. How do you feel?" "Tired and hot, and my stomach hurts." "I know, but you're going to be all right." She pressed her hand to his forehead, nearly sobbing with relief when she felt the fever had broken. His skin was still warm, but nothing like the dangerous heat from before. Nathan made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cry. He buried his face in Tommy's hair, his shoulders shaking. "You scared me, buddy. You scared me bad." "Sorry, Uncle Nate." Tommy's hand patted Nathan's arm weakly. "I didn't mean to." Ruth appeared with a cup of broth, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "Drink this, and then you're going back to bed, young man. No arguments." Tommy managed half the broth before exhaustion claimed him. This time, when his eyes closed, it was natural sleep, rather than fever delirium. Nathan carried him back upstairs, Eleanor following with fresh quilts and her medical bag, such as it was in case the fever spiked again. But Tommy's breathing stayed steady through the morning. And when Doc Preston finally arrived 3 hours later, red-faced from hard riding, he confirmed what Eleanor already knew. Crisis is past. The fever broke clean, and there's no sign of complications. The old doctor peered at Eleanor with new respect. You trained in Boston, Mrs. Bridger. Boston General Hospital. 4 years. It shows. Most frontier wives would have panicked and done more harm than good. You kept your head and likely saved this boy's life. He closed his bag with a snap. Keep him in bed for 3 days, light foods only, and watch for any return of the rash. But I think he'll make a full recovery. After Preston left, Eleanor found herself alone in the kitchen with Ruth. The older woman was scrubbing the table with more force than necessary, her movements sharp with leftover fear. You should rest, Ruth said without looking up. You've been awake all night. So have you. I'm used to it. Ruth's hands stilled on the cloth. Eleanor, I need to apologize. For what? For doubting you. For thinking you were just some Eastern girl playing at frontier life. Ruth finally met her eyes. What you did tonight, the way you handled Tommy's crisis, that took real skill and real courage. Lily would have done the same, and I can't give you higher praise than that. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, some final wall crumbling. I was terrified the whole time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite it. Ruth moved around the table and, to Eleanor's surprise, pulled her into a fierce hug. Welcome to the family, daughter. Truly. Eleanor returned the embrace, feeling tears she'd been holding back all night finally break free. She cried for Tommy, for the terror of almost losing him, for the weight of responsibility she'd taken on when she married Nathan. But she also cried with relief, with the bone-deep exhaustion of a crisis survived, and with something that felt dangerously close to belonging. When she finally pulled away, Ruth was smiling through her own tears. Now go. Your husband needs you, even if he's too stubborn to ask. Eleanor found Nathan in Tommy's room, sitting in a chair pulled close to the bed, watching the boy sleep with an intensity that suggested he was afraid to look away. He's all right, she said softly from the doorway. The fever won't come back. How can you be sure? I can't. Not absolutely. But in my experience, when scarlet fever breaks this cleanly, it stays broken. She moved to stand behind Nathan's chair, her hand finding his shoulder. You should rest. I'll watch him for a while. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see... He stopped, swallowing hard. You see Lily. I see everyone I've failed to protect. My parents, my brother, Lily, and our son. His voice cracked. I can't fail Tommy too. Eleanor knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. Nathan, listen to me. You didn't fail them. Your parents died of influenza. That's not something you could have prevented. Your brother's death was an accident, a tragic one, but not your fault. And Lily, I should have been there. Should have checked that ladder, should have made her stay in the house when she was so far along. And if you had, Thornton would have found another way. You can't protect people from everything, Nathan. All you can do is love them while they're here, and fight like hell to keep them safe. He pulled his hands free and stood pacing to the window. I'm not doing a very good job of keeping anyone safe. Tommy nearly died tonight, and you... Christ, Eleanor, you barely know us, and you're already in danger because of my enemies. I knew the risks when I agreed to this marriage. Did you really understand what you were walking into? He turned to face her, his expression raw. Because I'm starting to think I made a terrible mistake. I should have sent you to Denver or California, somewhere far from Thornton and his schemes. Instead, I married you and painted a target on your back. Eleanor stood slowly, anger sparking to life beneath her exhaustion. Don't you dare. Don't I dare what? Don't you dare try to make decisions for me because you think I'm too fragile to handle the truth. I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting from reality, Nathan. I'm a woman who survived scandal and betrayal and men who thought they could control me. I chose to stay here. I chose to marry you. And I choose to fight whatever comes, whether you think that's wise or not. Her words hung in the air between them. Nathan stared at her, something shifting in his expression. I'm not trying to control you. Aren't you? Telling me you made a mistake marrying me, suggesting I'd be better off somewhere else, that's you deciding what's best for me without asking what I want. What do you want? The question was quiet, almost desperate. I want partnership. Real partnership. Not you making decisions alone because you're trying to protect me from consequences I'm fully capable of understanding. Eleanor moved closer, holding his gaze. I want to be treated like an equal, not a burden. And I want you to trust that I'm strong enough to stand beside you in this fight, because I am. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I'm sorry. You're right. I was trying to protect you, but what I was really doing was pushing you away. Why? Because everyone I love leaves, dies or disappears or gets taken from me. And I thought maybe if I pushed you away first, it would hurt less when you went. The honesty of it struck Eleanor like a physical blow. She understood that impulse had felt it herself after Dr. Morrison and the hospital board and Robert Harrison. The urge to protect yourself by refusing to let anyone close enough to wound you. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. You're stuck with me, Nathan Bridger, for better or worse in sickness and in health, until death parts us. Those weren't just words I spoke in church. They were a promise. Something broke in Nathan's face. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that spoke of desperation and relief and something that might have been the beginning of love. I don't deserve you, he muttered against her hair. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. She felt him laugh, a shaky sound that was half sob. They stood there in the quiet room holding each other while Tommy slept peacefully nearby. And Eleanor felt something fundamental shift between them. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It was becoming something real, something worth fighting for. A knock on the doorframe made them pull apart. Bill Crawford stood there, hat in hand, his weathered face troubled. Sorry to interrupt, boss, but we've got a problem. Nathan's arms dropped from Eleanor's waist, his expression shifting back to careful control. What kind of problem? 3 of our mares are missing from the north pasture. Gate was left open, tracks in the snow lead toward Thornton's land. Could they have wandered? Not with the gate closed proper last night and open this morning. Someone wanted those horses gone. Eleanor saw Nathan's jaw tighten. Theft or sabotage? Either way, it's Thornton sending a message. Bill's voice was grim. Probably because you didn't take his offer. He's showing you what happens to men who say no. Nathan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Round up the hands. We're going after those horses. Nathan, it could be a trap, Eleanor said quietly. Could be. But those are valuable breeding stock, and I can't afford to lose them. Besides, if I don't respond, Thornton will see it as weakness and escalate. He turned to Eleanor. Stay here with Tommy and Ruth. Keep the rifle loaded and the doors locked. If anyone comes around who isn't Bill or one of our hands, you don't open the door. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You just promised to treat me as a partner. That means I get a say in decisions, and I say you need all the help you can get. Eleanor crossed her arms. I can ride and I can shoot. Ruth taught me yesterday while you were checking the fences. Nathan looked to Bill for support, but the foreman just shrugged. Woman's got a point. And we are short-handed with half the crew in town for supplies. It's too dangerous. Then we'll be dangerous together. Eleanor's voice was firm. I didn't marry you to sit home and worry while you ride into trouble alone. Either we're partners or we're not, Nathan. You decide. He studied her face, clearly torn between protectiveness and pragmatism. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you stay close to me. You follow orders without question. And if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed. Agreed. Ruth appeared with riding clothes, pants, and a heavy coat that had belonged to Lily. If you're going, wear these. Skirts will get you killed on horseback in snow. Eleanor changed quickly while Nathan and Bill gathered the hands. When she emerged, Ruth pressed a rifle into her hands. It's loaded. 6 shots, and I expect you to use every one if you have to. The older woman's face was fierce. You bring my boys back safe, you hear me? I'll do my best. They rode out into a world of white and silence, 6 riders moving through snow that came up to the horses' knees. Nathan led, following the tracks that were already starting to fill with fresh snowfall. Eleanor rode beside him, her hands steady on the reins despite the fear curling in her stomach. You all right? Nathan asked quietly. Ask me when we get back. He almost smiled. Fair enough. The tracks led north and west, crossing onto land that officially belonged to no one, but was understood to be part of Thornton's claimed territory. The further they rode, the more exposed Eleanor felt like they were walking into the mouth of a trap that hadn't sprung yet. There. Bill pointed ahead to where 3 horses stood in a makeshift corral, their breath steaming in the cold air. But it was what surrounded the corral that made Eleanor's blood run cold. A dozen men on horseback, all armed, all wearing the hard faces of men paid to cause trouble. And in the center, sitting his horse like he owned the world, was Colonel Beauregard Thornton. Bridger, Thornton called out pleasantly. I was hoping you'd come. Saves me the trouble of riding to your place again. Nathan reined in his horse 20 feet from the corral. Those are my horses, Thornton. I'm taking them home. Are they funny I found them wandering on my land? Finders keepers, as they say. Your land. Last I checked, this section was open range. Last you checked was before I filed claim with the Territorial Office. As of yesterday, this is officially Thornton land. The colonel's smile was sharp. Which means anything on it belongs to me, including these fine mares. Eleanor could feel the tension radiating from Nathan. She glanced at their small group 6 against 12, and Thornton's men looked like they knew how to use the rifles they carried. You filed a false claim, Nathan said quietly. My father's homestead extends to Clearwater Creek. Always has. Your father's claim is being contested. Questions about proper filing, questions about continuous residence during the proving period. Until those questions are resolved, I'm within my rights to claim disputed land. This is theft, plain and simple. This is business. I made you a fair offer for your ranch. You refused. So now we do this the hard way. Thornton's eyes found Eleanor, and his smile widened. How's married life treating you, Mrs. Bridger? I hope you're not regretting your hasty decision. The only thing I regret is wasting time on this conversation, Eleanor said coolly. Return the horses or face charges with the territorial marshal. The marshal is a reasonable man who understands how these things work. I've already spoken to him about the land dispute. He's very sympathetic to my position. Thornton leaned forward in his saddle. Here's what's going to happen, Bridger. You're going to ride home empty-handed. You're going to think very carefully about my offer. And in 3 days, you're going to accept it. Because if you don't, these horses will be the least of what you lose. Nathan's hand moved toward his gun. Immediately, Thornton's men raised their rifles, the clicks of hammers being cocked echoing across the snow. I wouldn't, Thornton said mildly. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Be smart, Bridger. Live to fight another day. Eleanor saw Nathan calculating odds, saw him realize they couldn't win this fight with bullets. She reached out and touched his arm, gentle but firm. He's right, she said quietly. This isn't the time. Nathan's jaw worked, but he nodded. This isn't over, Thornton. Of course it isn't. It's not over until you sign those papers or lose everything trying to hold on. Thornton's expression hardened. 3 days, Bridger. After that, I stopped being polite. They rode back to the ranch in grim silence, the loss of the mares burning like a wound. But Eleanor's mind was already working through possibilities, through legal precedents, and territorial law, through every tool they might use to fight back. That evening, after Tommy was settled and the ranch secured for the night, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with Nathan and Ruth papers spread between them. Tell me about your father's original filing, she said. Every detail you remember. Nathan pulled out a worn leather folder containing his father's homestead documents. Together they went through each page, each notation looking for weaknesses in their claim and strengths in their defense. The continuous residence requirement, Eleanor said thoughtfully. That's where Thornton will attack. He'll claim your father abandoned the land during some period, probably when he was sick. But he didn't. Pa lived here from 1847 until he died in 79. Never left for more than a few days at a time. Can you prove it? Do you have witnesses, records, anything that shows continuous occupation? Nathan was quiet, thinking. Then his face cleared. The ledgers. Pa kept ledgers of every transaction, every sale, every purchase, dated and signed by witnesses. If we can show continuous business activity that proves someone was living here managing operations. Where are these ledgers? In the study. 30 years worth. They spent the next 3 hours going through records, building a timeline of continuous occupation and improvement. With each entry, Eleanor's confidence grew. Nathan's father had been meticulous, documenting everything from cattle sales to fence repairs to seed purchases. It was a clear record of a working ranch, actively managed and continuously occupied. "This is good," she said finally. "This is really good. If we can get this in front of an honest judge, Thornton's claim falls apart." That's a big if. Thornton's got judges in his pocket throughout the territory. Then we find one he doesn't own. Eleanor looked up at Nathan, seeing hope kindle in his eyes. We fight this legally, properly, with documentation that can't be disputed. And we do it together. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. "I meant what I said earlier. I don't deserve you." "Then I suppose you'll just have to spend the rest of your life trying to earn me." He smiled, real and warm, and Eleanor felt her heart skip. This marriage had started as business as survival. But somewhere between Tommy's fever and Thornton's threats and long hours building a defense together, it was becoming something more. Something worth fighting for. Something worth keeping. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was nothing like Eleanor had imagined. She'd expected grandeur, marble columns, and polished wood befitting the seat of Wyoming's legal authority. Instead, she found a drafty building that smelled of tobacco and wet wool, packed with ranchers and lawyers and speculators, all jockeying for position in front of Judge Harrison Whitfield. Nathan stood beside her, his Sunday suit brushed clean but showing its age, his hand steady on the leather case containing 30 years of his father's meticulous records. Behind them sat Ruth and Tommy, the boy pale but recovering, insisting he was well enough to travel, despite Eleanor's medical objections. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Whitfield." The judge was a large man, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He settled behind the bench with the air of someone who'd heard every lie and seen every trick the law allowed. Case number 47. Thornton versus Bridger regarding contested land claim in Silver Ridge Territory. Whitfield's voice carried across the crowded room. "Colonel Thornton, you're claiming the Bridger homestead was improperly filed and abandoned during the required proving period. That correct?" Thornton's lawyer stood, a sharp-faced man named Cornelius Vance, who wore Eastern tailoring and a smile like a knife blade. "That's correct, Your Honor. We have evidence that Samuel Bridger failed to maintain continuous residence from 1877 through 1879, thereby forfeiting his claim under the Homestead Act of 1862. And Mr. Bridger, you dispute this?" Nathan rose, his voice steady, despite the tension Eleanor could feel radiating from him. "I do, Your Honor. My father lived on that land from the day he filed in 1847 until the day he died in 1879. Never left for more than a few days at a time." "We'll see about that." Whitfield gestured to Vance. "Present your evidence." What followed was a systematic attack on everything Samuel Bridger had built. Vance produced documents suggesting Samuel had been ill for extended periods, witness testimony claiming the ranch had looked abandoned. During certain months, property records showing decreased cattle sales that supposedly proved no one was actively managing the land. Eleanor listened with growing anger as Vance painted a picture of neglect and abandonment, twisting facts until they resembled lies. She watched Nathan's face grow tighter with each accusation, saw his hands clench on the armrests of his chair. When Vance finally sat down, looking pleased with himself, Judge Whitfield turned to Nathan. "Your response?" Nathan stood, pulling out the first of his father's ledgers. "Your Honor, my father kept detailed records of every transaction, every improvement, every single day he worked this land. With your permission, I'd like to enter these as evidence." Permission granted. For the next hour, Nathan walked the court through 30 years of documented ranch operations. Cattle purchases dated and signed. Fence repairs noted with costs and labor. Seed orders, equipment maintenance. Water rights fees paid annually without fail. Each entry proved not just occupancy, but active continuous management. Eleanor watched Vance's confident expression begin to crack. This wasn't speculation or hearsay. This was hard evidence, irrefutable and comprehensive. Furthermore, Nathan continued, his voice gaining strength, I have witness testimony from longtime residents of Silver Ridge who can confirm my father's continuous presence on the land. He called Bill Crawford first. The old foreman testified with rough honesty about working for Samuel Bridger from 1865 until his death, about seeing him every single day, tending cattle and mending fences, and doing the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. Then came Ann Hartford, who testified about buying eggs and vegetables from the Bridger Ranch every week for 15 years, about never once finding the place empty or abandoned. Reverend Murphy spoke about Samuel's regular church attendance, about baptizing Nathan and his brother Thomas, about burying Samuel when his heart finally gave out. One by one, the people of Silver Ridge stood up for the Bridgers, their testimony painting a picture that directly contradicted Thornton's claims of abandonment. But it was Eleanor's testimony that changed the tenor of the hearing. Mrs. Bridger, Judge Whitfield said, when she took the stand, you've only been in Wyoming territory for a few weeks. What could you possibly add to this discussion? I can speak to Colonel Thornton's pattern of behavior, Your Honor. Eleanor kept her voice level and professional. Before this hearing, I did some research into the Colonel's land acquisitions over the past 5 years. I found a troubling pattern. She pulled out papers she'd spent 3 sleepless nights preparing, documents gathered from territorial records and newspaper archives. In 1874, Thornton filed a claim against the Henderson Ranch citing abandonment. The Hendersons lost their land, and 6 months later, Thornton sold it to railroad interests for 3 times what he'd offered the family. In 1875, he challenged the Martinez homestead on similar grounds, same result. In 1876, the Chen family, the Kowalski brothers, and the Blackwell widow all lost their land to Thornton's legal challenges. Whitfield leaned forward, his eyes sharpening with interest. You're saying there's a pattern of fraudulent claims. I'm saying that in every case, the families Thornton challenged were sitting on land that became valuable immediately after he acquired it. Railroad routes, mineral deposits, water rights. Somehow the Colonel always knew which parcels would be worth the most. Vance shot to his feet. Objection. This is speculation and has no bearing on the current case. It establishes motive, Eleanor said calmly. The Bridger Ranch sits on the route of the proposed Union Pacific expansion. I have documentation from the Territorial Planning Office showing that the railroad intends to run through the northern section of their property. Land that Colonel Thornton has already offered to sell to the railroad pending his acquisition of the Bridger claim. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitfield banged his gavel calling for order, but Eleanor could see she'd struck a nerve. Vance was conferring urgently with Thornton, whose face had gone white with barely controlled rage. Mrs. Bridger, Whitfield said when quiet was restored, are you accusing Colonel Thornton of conspiracy to defraud homesteaders? I'm presenting evidence of a pattern, Your Honor. The court can draw its own conclusions. Whitfield studied the papers she'd submitted, his expression growing darker with each page. This is serious. If what you're suggesting is true, we're looking at systematic abuse of territorial land law. It's worse than that. Eleanor pulled out one final document, her hands steady despite her racing heart. I found records showing that Colonel Thornton has been paying certain territorial officials to delay homestead confirmations, allowing him to file competing claims before proper titles are established, including payments to the former Territorial Land Commissioner. That's a damned lie. Thornton was on his feet, his cultured southern drawl slipping into raw anger. Your Honor, I will not sit here and be slandered by some Boston troublemaker who married Bridger out of desperation. Sit down, Colonel. Whitfield's voice cracked like a whip. Mrs. Bridger, can you substantiate these claims? I can, Your Honor. I have bank records showing transfers from Thornton to Commissioner Walsh. I have correspondence between them discussing which homesteads to target. And I have testimony from Walsh's former clerk, who's willing to testify about the arrangement in exchange for immunity. Eleanor had spent the week before the hearing tracking down every lead, calling in favors from old contacts in Boston, using her nursing connections to find people who'd been hurt by Thornton's schemes and were ready to talk. It had been exhausting, dangerous work made more difficult by the need to keep it secret from Thornton's spies in Silver Ridge. But it had paid off. She could see it in Whitfield's face, in the way the other lawyers in the courtroom were suddenly taking notes, in the fear that flashed across Thornton's eyes before his mask of control slammed back into place. "Your Honor," Vance said desperately, "even if these allegations have merit, they don't change the facts of the Bridger case. The question is whether Samuel Bridger maintained continuous residence, not whether my client engaged in other business dealings." "The question," Whitfield said coldly, "is whether this court is being used as a tool for land theft. And based on what I'm hearing, that seems increasingly likely." He turned to Nathan. "Mr. Bridger, I'm prepared to rule on your case immediately. The evidence you've presented is comprehensive and convincing. Your father's claim was properly filed and continuously maintained. Colonel Thornton's challenge is denied." The courtroom exploded with noise. Nathan grabbed Eleanor's hand, squeezing so hard it hurt. Ruth was crying, and Tommy let out a whoop that probably violated courtroom decorum. But Whitfield wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm ordering a full investigation into Colonel Thornton's land acquisitions. If evidence of fraud is found, those titles will be voided and the land returned to its rightful owners. Marshal Foster, I want Colonel Thornton detained pending investigation." "You can't do this." Thornton surged to his feet as two marshals moved toward him. "I have rights. I have connections in Washington who will be very interested to learn about your activities, I'm sure." Whitfield's smile was thin and satisfied. "You've been stealing from honest homesteaders, Colonel. That ends today." As the marshals led Thornton away, still protesting his innocence, Eleanor felt Nathan's arm come around her waist. She leaned into him, suddenly exhausted, feeling the weight of the past weeks crash down on her all at once. "You did it," Nathan said quietly, wonder in his voice. "You actually did it. We did it, together." Eleanor looked up at him, seeing joy and relief, and something deeper in his gray eyes. "Partners, remember." "Partners," he agreed. Then right there in the crowded courtroom with half of Wyoming territory watching, he kissed her. Not a chaste peck or a business arrangement acknowledgement, but a real kiss full of gratitude and respect, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. When they broke apart, Tommy was grinning. Ruth was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, and Bill Crawford was slapping Nathan on the back, hard enough to leave bruises. "Drinks are on me!" Someone shouted from the back of the courtroom, and suddenly they were surrounded by well-wishers and ranchers who'd been waiting for someone to finally stand up to Thornton's schemes. Anne Hartford pushed through the crowd and pulled Eleanor into a fierce hug. "You just saved half the homesteads in this territory. How does it feel?" "Terrifying," Eleanor admitted. "And wonderful. And like I might throw up from the adrenaline." Anne laughed. "That sounds about right. Come on, Sam's holding a table at the restaurant. You need to eat something before you collapse." The celebration that followed was loud and chaotic, and exactly what they all needed after weeks of tension and fear. Eleanor found herself telling the story of her research over and over each time, emphasizing how Nathan's father's meticulous records had made the case possible, how the community's willingness to testify had made the difference. But as the afternoon wore into evening, and they finally headed back to their hotel, Eleanor felt the exhaustion truly hit. Nathan seemed to sense it, sending Tommy and Ruth ahead, while he and Eleanor walked slowly through Cheyenne's quiet streets. "I never thanked you properly," Nathan said after a long silence. "For everything you did. The research, the testimony saving Tommy's life. You've done more for this family in a month than anyone had a right to expect." "I did what needed doing, same as you would have." "No." He stopped walking, turning to face her under a street lamp's golden glow. "Eleanor, what you did went far beyond our agreement. You could have stayed quiet, let me fight this battle alone, protected yourself from Thornton's attention. Instead, you made yourself a target to help people you barely knew. You're my husband. Tommy's my family now. Of course I fought for you. Is that all we are? An agreement? A convenient arrangement? His hands found her face gentle and warm. Because somewhere between the depot and here, you became something more to me than a business partner. Eleanor's heart was pounding. What did I become? Someone I can't imagine my life without. Someone I want to build a real future with, not just a legal partnership. He paused, searching her eyes. I know we started this wrong. Rushed and practical, and based on necessity more than choice. But Eleanor, if I could go back to that Christmas Eve and do it all again, I'd still stop at that depot. I'd still offer you shelter. I'd still marry you. Because you're the best thing that's happened to me in 5 years, and I was a fool not to see it sooner. Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face before she realized she was crying. I was so angry when Robert's telegram came. So hurt and humiliated and certain my life was over. But Nathan, if he hadn't ended that engagement, I never would have found this. Found you. Found a place where I actually matter, where my skills are valued, where I can make a real difference. So you don't regret it. The hasty marriage, the danger, the complete upending of everything you planned. I regret nothing. She stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. Gratitude and affection, and the beginning of love. Nothing, except that we wasted so much time being practical when we could have been happy. They made their way back to the hotel in a daze of new understanding. Their hands linked their future suddenly full of possibilities that had nothing to do with business arrangements and everything to do with choice. The ride back to Silver Ridge took 2 days through snow that was finally beginning to melt, revealing the first hints of spring underneath. Tommy chattered endlessly about the trial, about how Aunt Eleanor had stood up to Colonel Thornton, about how Uncle Nate had looked when the judge ruled in their favor. Ruth rode beside Eleanor, her expression thoughtful. You know, when Nathan first brought you home, I thought you'd run. First sign of real trouble, I figured you'd be gone. I thought I might too, Eleanor admitted. What changed? Eleanor thought about it, watching Nathan ride ahead with Tommy, the two of them easy together in a way that spoke of deep love. I realized that running from problems doesn't solve them. It just moves them somewhere else. Better to stand and fight for something worth keeping. And Nathan's worth keeping. He is. This whole crazy family is. Eleanor smiled. Even you, Ruth Carson, with your sharp tongue and sharper judgment. Ruth laughed, the sound bright and free. Well, I suppose you're not so bad yourself, for a Boston nurse with questionable character. When they finally crested the hill that looked down on Bridger Ranch, Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. The buildings spread across the valley, smoke rising from the chimney horses grazing in the pasture that Thornton would never steal. This was home. Not just shelter or convenience, but actual home. That night, after Tommy was in bed and Ruth had retired to her room, Nathan and Eleanor sat by the fire in the room that was now truly theirs, not his or hers, but theirs together. I've been thinking, Nathan said quietly, about the ranch, about the future. We've got more land than we need for horses and cattle. What if we used some of it for something else? Like what? Like a school, a real school, not just whatever traveling teacher passes through once a year. Somewhere children like Tommy could learn properly, where they wouldn't have to choose between education and helping their families work the land. Eleanor's heart skipped. A school? You're trained as a nurse, but you could teach too. And there are dozens of families in this territory who'd pay for proper education if it was available. We could build something that lasts, something that helps people the way you helped me. The vision took shape in Eleanor's mind, a schoolhouse on Bridgerland, children learning reading and mathematics, and the kind of practical skills that would help them thrive in frontier life. A legacy that had nothing to do with land claims or legal battles, and everything to do with building community. Yes, she said simply. Yes, let's do that. Nathan pulled her close and they sat watching the fire paint shadows on the walls, planning a future that was theirs to build however they chose. 10 years later, Eleanor stood in front of the Bridger School for Western Education, watching children pour out into the spring sunshine at day's end. The building had started as a simple one-room structure, but had grown over the years into something substantial. 3 classrooms, a library, stocked with books donated from across the territory. Even a small medical clinic where Eleanor taught basic nursing skills to students interested in healthcare. Tommy, now 20, and managing the ranch alongside Nathan, rode up with his usual grin. "Ma says dinner's in an hour. She's making that roast you like, and she said to tell you if you're late again, she's feeding it to the dogs." Eleanor laughed. "Tell her I'll be there. I just need to finish grading these arithmetic papers." "Still can't believe you convinced the territorial government to fund this place," Tommy said, shaking his head. "When you first proposed it, everyone said it was impossible. Everyone except your uncle. He believed from the start. Uncle Nate believes in you. Always has, even when you were just the frozen lady from the depot." Tommy's expression went serious. "Eleanor, I wanted to thank you. For everything. For saving my life that night, for fighting for us at the trial, for giving me a real family again. I don't say it enough, but I'm grateful." Eleanor felt her eyes sting with tears. "You don't have to thank me, Tommy. You're my family. That's not something you earn, it's just something you are." After he rode off, Eleanor took a moment to look around at what they'd built. The school that served 40 children from across 3 counties. The clinic that had saved countless lives with basic medical care and preventative education. The community of families who'd settled nearby because they valued education and opportunity over isolation. This was the legacy she and Nathan had created together. Not just land or buildings, but actual change, actual good in the world. She walked home through the spring evening, breathing in the scent of new grass and pine, and found Nathan waiting on the porch where he'd waited so many evenings before. "How were the students today?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Brilliant, challenging, exhausting in all the best ways." She leaned into his warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Tommy says Ruth made roast." "She did. Also made me promise to keep you from working too late. Said you've been pushing yourself too hard again. Ruth worries too much. Ruth loves you. We all do." Nathan's arms tightened around her. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something." She pulled back to look at his face, seeing something uncertain there. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually. Better than I ever imagined it could be." He took her hands in his. 10 years ago, I found a desperate woman at a depot and brought her home out of simple Christian charity. I had no idea I was bringing home my future, my partner, the woman who'd save my ranch and my family and my entire life." "Nathan, let me finish, please." He squeezed her hands gently. "I've loved you for years now. Real love, not the business arrangement we started with. But I never told you properly, never said the words because I was afraid of pushing you into something you didn't want. But I'm tired of being afraid. So here it is, simple and plain. I love you, Eleanor Bridger. I love your courage and your stubbornness and the way you fight for what's right, even when it costs you. I love the life we've built and the future we're creating. And I wanted you to know." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face for the second time in their marriage. "You foolish man. I've loved you since the trial, maybe before. Since the night you held Tommy while I fought his fever, since the moment you treated me like a partner instead of a burden. I just thought you knew. How would I know if you never said it? Because I show you every day. In the school we built, in the way I stand beside you, in 1,000 small choices to stay when leaving would be easier." She pulled his face down to hers. "But if you need the words, here they are. I love you, Nathan Bridger. I choose you. Every single day I choose you." Their kiss was interrupted by Ruth calling from the kitchen that dinner was getting cold and they could be romantic after they ate. Honestly, some people had no sense of timing. They broke apart laughing, and Eleanor realized this was exactly right. Not perfect or polished or romantic in the fairy tale sense, but real and messy and full of the kind of love that survived hard times because it was built on mutual respect and shared purpose. She'd come west, running from scandal, and found redemption. She'd married for survival and found partnership. She'd expected nothing and gained everything. The depot platform where she'd nearly frozen was long gone, now torn down, when the railroad finally came through. But Eleanor would never forget standing there in the dark and cold, counting backwards from 100, trying to hold on to hope she didn't really feel. She'd survived that night because a stranger chose mercy over convenience. And in return, she'd given him back his life, his future, and a love neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. That was the real magic of the West, Eleanor thought, as they walked inside to family and warmth and the life they'd built together. Not the romantic mythology of cowboys and outlaws, but the truth that sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances, and sometimes love grew strongest in the hardest soil. She'd been abandoned at a depot on Christmas Eve with nothing but $3 and a broken heart. But she'd been found by a man who saw worth where others saw scandal, who offered partnership where others offered judgment, who chose to build something beautiful from the ruins of what they'd both lost. And that, more than any land claim, or legal victory, or school full of eager students, was the legacy that mattered most. They'd taken broken pieces and made something whole. They'd turned mercy into love and survival into joy. They'd chosen each other when they could have chosen safety, and in doing so had created something that would last long after they were gone. Eleanor Bridger had found her home, not in a place or a building, but in the steady strength of a man who kept his promises, in the laughter of a boy who called her family, in the daily work of building something that mattered. She'd come west, seeking escape, and found purpose instead. And she would spend the rest of her life grateful for the blizzard that stranded her, the telegram that shattered her plans, and the cowboy who refused to look away from a woman in need. Some stories began with "Once upon a time." Theirs began with "Are you waiting on someone?" spoken through a snowstorm by a stranger who became everything, and that was more than enough.